And this is a poll that was released from Data for Progress and Vox. They put out, they're both kind of left-leaning news and policy outfit, but they did a big poll on policing and about like which arguments, are going to work. And it, like, I especially like this question in context of what you were saying. Generally speaking, would you say that most police officers can be trusted, or you can't be too careful in dealing with police officers? And the top line is, 63% say they can be trusted, 31 say you can't be too careful. Democrats, it's about split. Obviously, Republicans think they can be trusted. But then it goes to racial groups. And Black folks, it is 63-32, you can't be too careful. Hispanic, Latino, 48-38. And white folks, 72, trusted, and 24, you can't be too careful. So, I mean, if something doesn't reinforce the racial disparities argument, it's a massive, 1,200 person nationwide poll with a gigantic, almost flip-flopped racial disparity breakdown. And, interestingly, though, a lot of the questions, though, say, like, do you think regular police patrolling your neighborhood would make you feel less safe or more safe? And that one's pretty universal. Like, everyone says more safe. Even the racial disparity disappears. So there's a weird thing happening where, like, most of the poll says people want more policing, but then there's huge racial disparities between whether or not you actually trust the policing. And so I guess where I'm at is I don't know how we cut through that, because I agree with everything you said. Like, obviously the institution of policing is not designed for safety. It's designed to protect white people and white wealth and maintain this hierarchy. Mm-hmm. But yet there's a lot of confusion in the data around people's opinions about police. And it's like, I wonder if it's like a chicken and the egg thing where it's like police is the only answer we have, so people just default to say, like, this is what we want. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's interesting because if you look at like the history of policing, like it comes out of slave catchers. And so it's not just like a monetary disparity. It's exactly what Ron is saying, exactly what you're saying. It's a white disparity, because lower class white Southerners would get paid immense amount of money for protecting property, for serving white enslaved owners. And so it comes from this place of being the answer to enslaved people escaping and actively pursuing their rights. And so I think it's something that has always been here in Americans' minds, but that's not true. Like, there are several different ways that policing and protection works around the world. And there is this extreme American white hubris that talks about how, well, this is the way it's always been done. This is the way it has to be done. And that there's no other option, even though this is something that, like, when you piece it all out, is still really new. I mean, America's still new in the terms of like world history. And so there is different ways we can go about this, but people are so like consumed with their own thought processes and Americans' own identity that they don't see it.
Two quick things.
Sure.
Number one, the disparity and you can't be too careful and distrust of police. I think that is the most disheartening statistic, and I'll tell you why. America just doesn't listen to Black folks. Yeah. Like, just full stop. And I know why. James Baldwin says, in Chicago, in places like Chicago, and he visits Chicago on the Fire Next Time, and writes about it. He says, not in Fire Next Time, but in an interview, he said, there's a wall, and you've purposely created that wall, and you don't want to see what's on the other side of it. And Chicago being the most segregated city, large city in America, and Minneapolis being very segregated. And every city in America, every large city in America has substantial issues with racial segregation. segregated housing. Chicago just happens to be really bad at it. But you've created these walls, you've created these communities. And oh, by the way, even for Black people, like with means, if you are a Black person that makes $80,000 a year, you're much more likely to live in a community with other Black folks who make $30,000 a year. If you're a white person who makes $30,000 a year, you're much more likely to live in a neighborhood where the average wealth is $80,000 a year with other white folks. So this is a racial issue. You can't buy your way out of this unless you like LeBron, right? By the way, because of segregated housing distribution and segregated real estate distribution, that still exists. So there is no getting out of that. And you've created these environments so you don't have to listen to Black people. When I hear white people talk about their experiences with police, I never have, and frankly cannot say, well, you lied. You probably have really good experiences with police. I'm not denying that. My thing is, though, why are mine less valid than yours? And if mine are valid, as I respect yours for being valid, then we have a problem here. If that many Black folks, if that many anything say, I have a problem with this state entity, then we have a problem with the state entity as fellow Americans. And we should listen to what they have to say and say, well, oh shit, I mean, it's working for me, but it's clearly not working for them. So we need to reform this. And that's just America not having to listen to Black folks, creating an environment purposely through segregated housing and a variety of the means of not having to listen to Black folks. The second thing is the more policing, less policing, and that being less of a racial disparity. There's an incredible book, Locking Up Our Own by James Forman Jr. And he goes through, and he's very frank. It's a really, really good book. He uses some really good like life stories of people, because he was a public defender in DC, so people he represented while he was a PD in DC. And there were Black leaders in the 80s calling for more incarceration, right? Like, because be frank, like, and I was born in Hugo in 89, like Hugo got the crack, and like crack got the Hugo in like 92, 93. Like I remember my mom and my aunties like being confused as fuck. It's like, why are these people walking up and down the street all day and night? Like, why is her brothers or half brothers, step brothers, whatever, like stealing ACs at they mama's house? Like they had never seen anything like that, right? Crack was confusing. So, which by the way, I'm going to read Drug Use for Grown Ups by Carl J. Hart. I need to read that. It's on my list. I have the book. I have to fucking read it. Just to say, like, the reasoning for those struggling with crack addiction in the worst ways. It's not that crack is just so much more addictive. It's that they have other issues and that leads to substance abuse. And we should probably try to address those other issues. And by the way, for mostly higher socioeconomic, non-Black folks, they have crack addiction. And even if it ain't fucking addiction, the way they're treated is vastly different. But all of that to say, as Hart is acknowledging in this book, at least from what I've read about it, I have to actually read the fucking book, as James Forman Jr. acknowledges in Locking Up Our Own, they give Black folks nothing but police. Again, having lived on the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, working in North Tulsa, if you drive through these communities, you're going to see a police car on every other fucking corner. What you're not going to see is investment in the fucking community. You're not seeing jobs going up. You're not seeing substance abuse centers going up. You're not seeing nonprofits or whatever else that people need going up. All you've given them is police. Right. And shit. Just being frank, living on south and west side of Chicago, like those communities, we have purposefully pillaged them. And so it like those places are not, they're not golf courses. And that's purposefully so. Right. And so if it's police or nothing, a lot of people there will say, well, fuck, I mean, give me the police. But the question should not be police or nothing. The question should be, what is the best way to have this be a safe and thriving community? And I'll leave you with this, right? Yeah. Because I mentioned earlier, several $1 billion was taken from south side of Chicago neighborhoods, not from the jobs they didn't get, not from the schools they couldn't attend, just from the housing segregation in the city of Chicago. And so when people talk about how these communities are, and that happened in every Black neighborhood in America, my question to them is always, if I took $5 billion of wealth from any fucking community in this country, how should it look?